So let me introduce you now to one of the young bucks of this movement from Southern California. He's really a relatively quiet but powerful person in this conversation in California, Ryan Snyder. He's a professor at the university at UCLA. He's a planner by profession. He has done the bike walking plans for most of the cities in Los Angeles County, and there's some 88 of them here and in Orange County and elsewhere around here. He is teaching this stuff at UCLA. He sells out in his performances there, and there's waiting lists for these brilliant young planners that are coming through learning his technique. In 2001, he wrote the plan for Long Beach, and it sat on a shelf until Suja Lowenthal showed up and dusted it off and said, hey, we've already had some deep thinking on this. Here's a roadmap to do this, and that's exactly what the staff picked up and started writing grants for in $500,000 chunks, and has made this campaign what it is today. So Ryan is sort of the Dr. Oz of bicycle and pedestrian planning in Southern Cal. He's kind of one of those hip celebrity types that get things done around here. He's developed a model street design manual that he's going to talk to you about, and he's going to use his 5 or 10 minutes to attempt to whip you into a frenzy. Let's see how he does. Ryan Snyder.
Young buck, I like that. Thanks, Charlie. Why, how many of you remember the election when we all decided how our streets should be used, and that the primary purpose of our streets should be moving cars? You remember that election? That's because it never took place. It's really by happenstance that our streets have come to be places for cars and not for anyone else. And I'm here to talk about street manuals, and while I'm talking, there will be images on here showing two very different versions that can result from two very different ways of designing our streets. One, the sort of auto-centric, schlocky arterial strips that don't produce places that people really want to be, and two, based on a very different set of values. Now, we're here at a walking and bicycling conference, but I think you all understand that this is much bigger than walking and bicycling, that you are here really for a bigger set of values. And in order for us to create walkable, bikeable communities, we have to address this in a broader context. We have to get into the DNA of how our streets are designed. It doesn't work to try to retrofit after the streets have already been messed up. So sort of the old way of designing our streets has been very auto-centric, and those are embedded in the way our street manuals and our standards and design guidelines have been done. Now, I was inspired by places like Louisville, Charlotte, New York, San Francisco, Congress for the New Urbanism, and others that came up with a street manual with a very different set of values. And so I wanted one for Los Angeles. We were able to pull together a County of Los Angeles Department of Public Health grant, along with some help from UCLA, to bring in some great experts, many of them in the room today, to create a street manual based on a very different set of values. A street manual, by the way, that you can find at modelstreetdesignmanual.com. It's a free download. You can use it. I'll be talking more about it later today in 2 different sessions if you want to hear more about it. But this manual is based on the fact that we want communities that are healthy. We want livable communities. We want communities where a 7-year-old boy or girl can cross the street and walk to school. We want a place where an 85-year-old can get across the street and not be trapped in their neighborhood. We want places that are environmentally sustainable. We want beautiful streets and beautiful neighborhoods. We want strong neighborhoods. We want streets and places where people can interact, where human interaction and the social value of the street is really a big part of how our street is designed. So we created a manual based on that set of values, people-oriented values, and we've got a number of chapters, one that talks all about the street networks and classification. We do have a chapter that talks about this vision. There's the traveled way design. We talk about the cross-section of the street, chapter on intersections, a chapter on universal access and sidewalk design, a chapter on pedestrian crossings, one on bikeway design, how to integrate transit into our streets, traffic calming, a chapter on streetscape ecosystem, how to treat our street water and how to streetscape our streets to make them beautiful. A chapter on thinking of our streets as public space. The majority of our public space in our cities, when you add up all the schools and civic centers and so forth, the majority of our public space is in our streets. And rather than think of our streets as conduits for moving cars, we should think of them as public space and say, how do we want to use this public space? What is the highest and best use of that? We have a chapter on how buildings should juxtapose to the sidewalks and the streets, as well as one on retrofitting suburbia. So we've created a kind of a mess. What can we do to retrofit that and try to come back and do things differently? We also have a chapter on engaging the community in the design of their streets. Now that's what the manual is about. Again, a very different vision of what our streets are. And that does, if we design along those lines, we will create walkable, bikeable communities. Now, in your work and in my work, on a regular basis, I do run into situations where somebody says, well, what you're trying to do here is going to impede the flow of automobiles, and that you're going to slow cars down, and that you just can't do that. And they'll try to make you feel guilty about doing this. They will. And you've been in these conversations before, haven't you? Yes. Okay. Well, when I get in those conversations, I try to remind these people that by doing things that way, we are running right in the face of all of those other set of values. When we frame it that way, if we're going to favor the movement of cars at every turn, we're not going to have these kind of communities that we're going to live in. We're going to have places like this. This is what we end up with when we favor cars in our design of our streets. Get into that DNA and create places like this. It's a very different thing. And so, you know, the old way of doing things has not been particularly good to us. And at a time when 1 out of 3 Americans with current trends will become diabetic in their lifetime due to physical inactivity. And when we've got over 30,000 traffic fatalities every year, when we have neighborhoods where kids can't walk to school and their parents are driving them half a mile to school, and at a time when senior citizens are trapped in their neighborhoods because they can't cross the street, and at a time when we are creating streets and communities, not like this, but when the other one comes along like this, streets and neighborhoods that you don't want to live in. Our communities aren't places that are particularly worth living in. And with climate change, folks, this is a big one. We've got to turn this one around. Our autocentric way of life is bringing us climate change, and if we don't turn that around real soon, this planet is not going to be worth living on. We have bigger issues to worry about than a little bit of traffic congestion. So make sure that when you get out there and you have these discussions, frame it that way. Make sure that you're telling people that these values are more important than these other values, and that you want to live in places like this instead of places like you see in these other images. So keep doing all the great work you're doing. Have a great conference. You're saving the world.